Jeez. Now that's what I call a sunset. But you know, the floating text in the sky does make a pretty good point. You guys came here for a reason, haven't you? I can't just be staring out in the distance all day. We gotta get onto this video by ranking the 2D Zelda games. Another Zelda ranking in store for you today. And there are actually way more 2D Zelda games than 3D ones, and these games are generally not as discussed, so we are getting into some interesting unknown territory today. Now, if you are familiar with this ranking series, you'll know that I rank various games in different video game series and sub-series. Like, look, I already ranked the 3D Zeldas that you can view in the description. So hit subscribe if you want to know when the next ranking videos are released. And as always, I reveal the next ranking video at the end of this one. So let's get on to this ranking and journey through the 2D Zelda games. Is that a chicken? What's he doing here? Wait, we're talking about Zelda, aren't we? So that's not a chicken, it's a cuckoo, isn't it? Okay, so we are starting this list off with 12 different Zelda games that we have to rank today. And the one that comes in very last place, the one we're starting off here, is really no surprise to anyone. It's The Legend of Zelda number 2. Yes, The Legend of Zelda Adventure of Link. And it's a, well, different kind of Zelda game, let's say. It is probably the least Zelda-y Zelda game. And that's fine and all, but I just find this game to be kinda alright. And on top of that, it has a lot of, well, dated mechanics nowadays, making it even harder for me to get into. Yeah, sure, this game can be brutally hard, and sure, this game can be brutally ugly, but I mainly don't like it because it lacks a lot of the unique elements that are exclusive to Zelda games and just feels like a more generic RPG. See, there was only one Zelda game before this one at the time, so I can appreciate that they tried something completely different for the sequel, but I'd say the original formula was better. This time around, there's an overworld to explore and a top-down perspective, and then there's even areas you go to that switches to a side-scroller. In the overworld, there's like these wild encounters that place you in a 2D arena where you fight enemies for experience. And it's just a lot slower and dialogue-based this time. And, you know, it's not even funny or interesting text that you read when talking to people. It's just blatant hints that they tell you. This just slows the pace down so much when you have to go through towns and search for people. However, that all being said, there is definitely still an appeal to this game. It can be very rewarding. There is a certain satisfaction you get when you master an enemy's attack pattern and take them out without taking any damage yourself. This did actually give all the enemies and bosses a unique appeal to fighting them, unlike any other Zelda games after this one. You can really get into a good rhythm in some fights. All in all though, while this game can be rewarding and fun, I'll choose other Zelda games to play in my free time. So the next game we have here was a concept really not seen in any other Zelda game before. And honestly, we really haven't seen it in any video game before. But I'll get onto that in just a bit, because this is 4 Swords Adventures. 4 swords, 4 links, and 4 Game Boy Advances to play this thing. What? Pretty well, everything was scaled up 4 times. And this made the combat really entertaining. They can throw so many enemies at you at certain points, and it's just great mowing down this amount of monsters. Especially when you're playing single player, because then you get to control all 4 links at the same time. And honestly, considering this was a multiplayer focused Zelda game, controlling 4 links in single player is still fun in its own right. You're just so powerful. Who knows, maybe this led them to make the Hyrule Warriors style Zelda game in the future. I also can appreciate how Nintendo was trying to innovate multiplayer Zelda and, well, just multiplayer games in general. And they did this by having your controller be a Game Boy Advance in the game. This would make it so on the overworld, everyone shared one screen on the TV. But when you went into dungeons or houses, the players would use their Game Boy screen, and this would allow everyone to explore these areas separately. To do this though, you did need 4 Game Boys, 4 Game Boy adapters, a GameCube, and a copy of this game, so the practicality of this concept wasn't always the greatest. But I still like the ambition of this project. And okay, that's all good and all, but ultimately why this one is last on the list is just because it felt the least adventure-like out of all the Zeldas, which is, you know, a game series about going on adventures. And while the gameplay in this one is very solid and I really enjoyed it, the thing that's keeping it ranked down here is how it lacks a lot of features that most other Zelda games have, like an open world to explore or interesting side quests. It's very level based and feels the least like a believable world. And yeah, I get it's going for a more linear experience and it is a fun one, but I like the other games with those other features better. So we're changing things up here again because we are talking about the first handheld Zelda game. And I guess they're not changing too much because this is yet again another multiplayer Zelda adventure. Triforce Heroes. I'd say this one is the slightly better multiplayer game. This game's weird though, like even for a Zelda game, which can already get pretty odd as is. This is even weird for that standard, because it is based around fashion. Yeah, you heard that right. This witch curses the princess this time to forever wear ugly tights. This makes the people of the kingdom now scared to be stylish in fear of the curse. Yeah, I don't know either, but this does give you an excuse to wear a bunch of funny outfits unlike any other Zelda game before. And these aren't even just aesthetic changes, because each outfit that you wear gives you a different in-game ability, and it was a lot of fun seeing what each of them had to offer. And besides the fashion here, teamwork is the name of the game this time around. You have to work together with your 2 other Link buddies in order to solve multiplayer puzzles. Teamwork is even more encouraged this time with new team features, I guess I'll call it, such as everyone sharing 1 life bar. Oh yeah, and that makes things a bit more tense, and considering that dying will result in you restarting the level, this game just causes a lot of hectic and fun multiplayer situations. Yes, this is a linear level-based Zelda game, which still isn't great, but at least this time you could collect all these different materials that you find in the levels to make more clothes for yourself. And this just gave all the levels more replayability and a greater incentive to look for more secrets, because all of the levels had a lot of them. Yeah, really my complaints are similar to the Four Swords ones. These multiplayer Zelda games can't really compete with the single player focused Zelda experiences. But I say this one is better because of how well all the levels were designed. Okay, so that multiplayer Zelda game was fun and all, but I think we should go back to a more single player focused Zelda game. Like, really far back. Further. 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 Come on, keep it moving. Further, further. Wait. Too far back. Perfect. The original, the classic, the game responsible for starting this entire series and the game that really hasn't aged that well, has it? Yes, this is Zelda on the NES. But that being said, I gotta say, I still have a lot of respect for this game. There was so much just stuff crammed into this game for its time. Like, they went literally crazy with the secrets. So many hidden doors and caves scattered everywhere, so you always felt like there was more to see in this open world. And speaking of the world, it was actually really big at the time. Just look at the size of this thing and the amount of screens it holds. You're like the size of an ant in comparison. On top of that, there were a bunch of big dungeons in the world, making even more areas to explore. The sword fighting in this game was simple, but every enemy served a unique purpose and they all had different attack patterns. It was really a puzzle in and of itself to find each enemy's weak points in order to develop your own strategies to take them out. There were these snakes that charged right at you if you were in their sight, so it was important to avoid that. Or there's these knights that were really tough and couldn't be attacked head on. However, you could strategically place bombs in their path so they get caught in the blast. Honestly, I'd say the core of this game is brilliant. The pure freedom and the world that is littered with secrets is a concept that still holds up today. And really, my main problems with this game are just due to this game being old. Like, Jesus, nowadays, this game can be so cryptic. Some of the secrets have literally no indication of what they are. So you'll be randomly pushing blocks in every direction or throwing bombs at every spot in a wall. Like, sure, it's cool to randomly stumble upon a secret, but it's not the most rewarding to me. And the controls are a bit rough around the edges, especially since your movement is limited to 4 directions, but you cannot deny the legacy this created, and it is still fun to play the original game even today. Okay, so now we've talked about the more dated NES Zelda games and the multiplayer type adventures, so now I want to move on to a game that looked really cool when it was first shown off. This was the direct sequel to Wind Waker and the first Zelda on the DS. The Legend of Zelda Phantom of the Opera. Remember the Nintendo DS? Well, you'll sure remember it if you play this game again. They literally incorporated every single DS feature into this game. I mean, they even had an entire island that's just one big DS console, so they really were showing all it could offer. To be fair, this did allow for some cool interactions that only could be done using the DS. The best of which I'd say is how you use the boomerang. You can draw the exact path that it will take, giving you pinpoint accuracy of where you want the throwing arc to go. A lot of people complained about how you had to tap to walk anywhere, and I don't know, this always worked fine for me, but yes, a simple option to use the D-pad would have been nice. The only part of the DS features that actually bugged me were the sailing sections. You can't control the boat directly in these parts, but you draw a line and the boat goes where you draw it. Like, come on, just let me sail the boat. I love the sailing in Wind Waker. I don't even care if I have to tap to control it, just enough with the drawing here. Okay, moving on. My only other complaint really is that one temple you always return to, the Temple of the Ocean King. While, again, not as bad as people make it out to be, it is by no means good game design, and it just wears on you by the end of the game. Other than that, though, the characters were awesome. There's this new guy, Linebeck over here. He's a pretty hilarious pirate captain that really only helps you for his own interest. However, as the game progresses, he goes through some interesting character development. And there are some really fun and imaginative islands that you get to visit throughout your adventure. For one of them, you can't even get to land until you get this cannon upgrade, since you need to blast the ice wall surrounding it. And then this island has a species of snow creatures that always look like they're wearing a coat. Overall, I'd say it is a pretty good game with some issues in it. But considering all the other Zelda games are masterpieces on the list, this one just gets lost in the crowd sometimes. So yes, Phantom Hourglass overall was a pretty good time, and I guess Nintendo seemed to agree, or they just had more ideas for this type of game, because just 2 years later, we got a pretty well direct sequel to Phantom Hourglass. Spirit Tracks or Phantom Hourglass. Both are similar games, but I'd say Spirit Tracks is a bit better. This game just polished up and fixed a few issues with Phantom Hourglass. The biggest change here is how the game is all about riding trains, and I'd say, well, it's not perfect, it's a big improvement from the touchscreen boat. It's a lot more quicker this time, and the whole process is just a lot more streamlined, allowing for more things to be done while you ride around. They even added this Lost Forest place of sorts where you're on the train this time and you have to change railroads for different paths. Plus, I'll just give it points for originality. It's a Zelda train, come on, add this as a ride in Super Nintendo World. The other awesome feature this time is how you work with Zelda. She's kinda just a ghost this time for a bunch of story reasons and such, but what that means in terms of gameplay is that you can use Zelda to possess these Phantom Knights and then use them at your will. You can control this Phantom Zelda thing to solve interesting two-player puzzles and just take out really strong enemies. Also, they did bring back the concept of returning to one dungeon again, but actually made it fun somehow. Yes, even this is better. Instead of descending deeper and deeper in a dungeon, you're ascending this giant tower. And it's just really cool to see the massive scale of this building as you're climbing up. But what's even better than that is that you don't even have to repeat the same floors this time. They built you a staircase now. And another thing that had a really epic scale were the bosses. They perfectly used both DS screens to give you a very tall view of these enemies, and it was just a clever use of the system. It's really cool to see the scale of these huge creatures on such a tiny system. Sure, it does use a lot of the more gimmicky DS features again, which still isn't great, but it does so much right that it really isn't a big deal, and this still makes it a great game. Huh? What? Is my video glitched, I hear you say? Why was there 2 numbers in the number transition? Well, that's because we are talking about 2 games in this segment that were kind of like 2 pieces of the same puzzle and were released at the same time. Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages. So the reason I'm talking about these 2 in one segment is because they share a lot of similarities, including game mechanics, so to have 2 different segments probably would have gotten repetitive. Plus, even Nintendo made these games to be played together. But for the record, I'd put Ages at the 6th spot and Seasons at 5. Okay, got it? Let's go. These 2 games were certainly unique, even as Zelda games. While the world you explored was pretty simple, each game used a unique method of altering the landscape to make areas feel new again. In Ages, there was this harp that warped you back in time, and in Seasons, you use this rod to alter the game between 4 different season variants. It's like that one level in Banjo-Kazooie, but for the the entire game. This feature was particularly interesting, I'd say. Also, the items in these games were just interesting as well. I don't know what their deal was here, but they just introduced so many new and unique items, some of which have never returned in any Zelda game after. Just look at this magnet item where you can attract or repel yourself from certain objects to cross pits and stuff. Plus, there's all these rings that all change certain properties of the character and can even transform you sometimes. But there are so many of them to collect, so I can't even go through all of them with you. Like, geez, just look at them all. And in these games, there's even like animal buddies from Donkey Kong that Link can ride this time. You got this flying bear with tiny wings that just looks hilarious, and the boxing kangaroo that is equally as funny looking. And again, these concepts have never returned in any Zelda game after. Plus, the dungeons in these games were so great, one of the highlights. There's even a dungeon where you have to use your time machine harp to solve and progress through puzzles here. Just like, what a great concept. Time machine puzzles in a Zelda game. And even with all these similarities between the two games, there are many ways that these games even play out differently. Most notably with seasons having a lot more combat and ages having a lot more puzzles. So cool that they made these games like that so they each can stand out on their own. It felt like with these two, Nintendo threw a lot of new ideas at the wall and just saw how it played out. Just the way these games play and were released were such a different concept than any other Zelda game before, and even since to a certain extent. Okay, so let's continue on with yet another handheld Zelda game, and once again, this is a very weird one as well. And even though it is very different, it does look a lot like the Oracle games we just talked about. This is Link's Awakening. Okay, so Link's now awakened in Link's Awakening. This is the very first handheld Zelda game, and they clearly already knew what they were doing when making this one. This game's another unusual Zelda experience. The world you're exploring here just seems very surreal. There's all these talking animals for some reason on the island, and even Mario enemies? Okay, sure, we'll roll with it. The atmosphere here is really like no other Zelda game before, and the dialogue is like pretty weird, but funny. It's all sarcastic at times, and the characters can almost seem self-aware as well. Hey man, when you want to save, just push all the buttons at once. Don't ask me what that means, I'm just a kid. Right, just a kid, eh? I'm on to you. Yeah, this island is an interesting place, let's say. Speaking of the island, while it isn't the biggest Zelda overworld we've seen, it is definitely one of the most dense. Every screen has something to do, and it just seems like there is no wasted space on the island. This very well could be due to the limitations of it being on a Game Boy, so they had to use their space effectively, but either way, it maximizes what can be done on this island. Honestly, it's kinda crazy the amount of stuff they put in here, considering it's on the Game Boy. It's not a lacking Zelda game in any way, and in fact, surpasses a lot of the other 2D Zelda games. The combat is as satisfying as ever, the dungeons are pretty varied, and there are still so many items to find. Plus there's even these seashell items now that you have to collect so you can trade them for really powerful weapons. Probably the only noticeable limitation is how you can only have 2 items out at one time, and this is just due to, well, I mean, you only got 2 buttons to work with, so yeah, not much you can do here. Everything else though is a fully fleshed out Zelda game. Okay, top 3 games now, and we are getting on to some serious territory here. And all the games that you see on screen are all fantastic in their own right. So let's get on to a game that is universally praised and well known, A Link to the Past. Yes, the big one. There are so many people who love this game and even say it's the best Zelda ever. While I wouldn't go quite that far, it's still one of the best 2D Zelda games ever. This game created so many Zelda staples that were carried onto a lot of Zelda games after. Take the concept of a dark world. Yes, before every Zelda game and its mother had a dark world in it, there was just this game that had one. And what a brilliant idea a dark world was to have. For the time, the world in this game was already pretty big, and by having a dark world that you can unlock as you play through the story, it essentially doubles the size of the map. Well, kinda, not entirely, but you know what I mean. Also, this game had some of the best 2D Zelda bosses. Brand new ideas were introduced in ways that the bosses could attack you, and their designs cleverly hinted at their weak points of sorts without making it too obvious. Also, I'd say this game had some of the best puzzles in the dungeons. Take these rat-looking guys here. At first glance, when you enter the room, everything seems normal until you realize they mimic your every move. And the leader always shoots a fireball at you, making it hard to get in range to hit him. I danced around this guy for so long until I realized I could essentially control him to walk into one of my arrows. And that was like the most satisfying puzzle ever, taking this guy out. Just your quest and the story this time were super epic too. The stakes were so high. You see your uncle die at the very start, and then you have to save Zelda from the dungeon. Then later on, you literally see her get taken right in front of your eyes. There couldn't be a greater incentive to save Hyrule. I describe this game basically as the first 2D Zelda game to have it all. An open world, fun combat, diverse and interesting enemies, a compelling story, and playing as a pink bunny. Hey, Link's hair is pink in this game too. Anyone ever notice this? So here we are yet again. We get to the point in the video with just 2 games left. And oddly enough, this time, the best 2D Zelda games are both handheld experiences. This is great just to see the quality remain on these handheld consoles. So let's not waste any more time and get on to the number 2 spot, The Legend of Zelda, A Link Between Worlds. Wait, huh? A Link Between Worlds? What is this? I just talked about Link to the Past. Now you're gonna pretty it up and sell it back to me? Well, while this game does have a similar map, enemies, and even story moments, there are enough new things added to make this game stand out on its own and even surpass Link to the Past. Take the new way items are handled in this game. No longer do you need to get a new item in every dungeon, but now you can buy them all at once, anytime, from this weird looking bunny dude, who also decided to steal your house and make it into his own shop. Okay, annoying merchant aside, this concept was an interesting change in the Zelda series. In previous Zelda games, at certain times, you would see an object that blocks your path, and you really couldn't do anything about it since you had to wait like 3 more dungeons to get a specific item. Here though, you can just buy that item at any time, making pretty well most of the world accessible from the start. This gives you so much freedom when exploring this awesome world. Also, if you die, you lose all of your items, making it a much greater penalty for dying in Zelda that just creates more tense moments. While I wouldn't say every Zelda should go in this route, it was a nice change to see it here. This game is literally what would happen if you took Link to the Past, then polished it and fine-tuned it to a pulp. The controls were very smooth this time around, more than any other 2D Zelda game before. Plus the combat was super satisfying, and I'd say probably the most fun 2D Zelda game to get into battles. Oh yeah, and obviously there's this new wall merging mechanic. Probably should have mentioned that by now. This was really interesting and just a fun spin on the 2D perspective. It really caused the player to be aware of their surroundings and think in new ways. Literally, this one concept alone completely flips how you view areas in this game and was just a brilliant design choice that contributed to make this excellent game. Alright, at first glance, this game may just seem like a simple handheld Zelda game on the Game Boy of all systems. But it's secretly a fantastic 2D Zelda game. The best one, in fact. This game is literally bursting with originality. The whole theme this time is that you can shrink down to the size of literally an ant by using these portals in various trees and stuff. I don't know why no one else discovered these portals when they chopped down all the trees, but okay, we don't question it. And you can do different things based on your 2 different sizes, giving you 2 unique ways of interacting with most areas in the world. A mere fly now becomes an enemy that can hurt you, and raindrops even become dangerous obstacles that you need to avoid. Hell, the boss in the first dungeon is just a normal jelly guy, but since you're shrunken down, he becomes a giant jelly guy. Whoa. And speaking of the dungeons, they were awesome. One of the best things about this game. They all had really unique concepts as well as theming that they used throughout the entire dungeon in new ways. There's dungeons where you're in the mines looking for diamonds or whatever while riding around in minecarts. Or even a dungeon that is high up in the sky where you learn to fly. Okay, well, kinda learn to fly. I'll go with more of a higher jump of sorts. The puzzles were all creative and satisfying to solve too. They really had a lot of new clever ideas by using all the items in the dungeons. And even though this is a 2D sprite-based game, they used a lot of creative ways to make certain objects look 3D, such as this rotating barrel here. Plus, we have a pretty unique and interesting villain this time, known as Vaati. While at first he may just look like some emo kid, but he actually has an interesting backstory with your helper person this time, Ezlo, the talking bird hat guy. And Ezlo too was also pretty funny and a sarcastic companion to have this time. He doesn't even want to be here with you half the time. It's crazy how this game came to be. They just perfected every element in a 2D Zelda game all the way back on the Game Boy. Hey guys, so I had this last segment all ready, but now I can't seem to find the next game series I wanted to rank. Pretty sure it was in this bin here, but I've been looking all day with no luck. Next time. Oh, well, here's the Wii remote needed for the game. And what does every Wii console need?